They mocked her tiny inheritance, a run-down barn on a forgotten acre. But what she found behind a hidden door would expose a town's darkest secret and rewrite her entire life. If you've ever felt like the world handed you nothing but scraps, and you had to find a way to build a future from them, then I need you to hit that subscribe button and stick around. This story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state was concerned. For 10 years, I had been a file in a cabinet, a case number, a line item in a budget. Now the file was being closed. The official term was aging out. It sounded so gentle, like a leaf gracefully detaching from a branch. The reality felt more like being pushed off a cliff. My caseworker, Mr. Henderson, a man whose permanent expression was one of tired apology, sat across from me in the sterile visitation room of the group home. The air smelled of bleach and regret. He slid a manila envelope across the gray laminate table. It made a soft, defeated sound. "Happy birthday, Maya," he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. He was a good man, or as good as the system allowed a man to be. He'd tried, but trying doesn't pay rent. "This came for you, from your grandmother's estate." I stared at the envelope. Estate. The word conjured images of sprawling lawns and marble fountains, of families gathering in paneled libraries to hear a will read aloud. My life had been the opposite of that. My grandmother, according to the thin narrative I'd been given, had surrendered me to the state after my parents died. She was too old, too poor, too broken to handle a child. Then she had disappeared from my life as completely as a puff of smoke. I hadn't heard from her in a decade. I'd assumed she was long gone. "She passed away 2 years ago," Mr. Henderson explained, as if reading my thoughts. "It's taken this long for the probate court to sort things out. There wasn't much, I'm afraid." He looked down at his hands, avoiding my eyes. That was a bad sign. When Mr. Henderson couldn't look at you, the news was never good. "It's a property, a deed." A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, hope, maybe, stirred in my chest. A property, a house, a place to land, a place that was mine. It felt too big to comprehend. "Where?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. He finally looked up, and the apology in his eyes was so profound it made my stomach clench. "It's rural, Maya, very rural. A town called Havenwood, about 5 hours north of here." He pushed the envelope closer. "The deed is inside. And this." He pulled a smaller, lumpy envelope from his briefcase. These were her personal effects, what was left. I opened the large envelope first. My hands were trembling slightly. Inside was a single, brittle piece of paper, a quitclaim deed. It granted me, Maya Elizabeth Thorne, sole ownership of a plot of land. 1 acre, it specified. And on that acre, one structure, a barn. Not a house, a barn. My fragile spark of hope sputtered and died, leaving behind the familiar cold ash of disappointment. A barn. What was I supposed to do with a barn? I looked at Mr. Henderson. He was already nodding, his face a mask of weary sympathy. "I know," he said softly. "It's not what we hoped for." I looked it up. The property taxes are negligible, but the structure is, well, it's listed as derelict. Basically worthless. He slid another paper across the table. It was a letter, printed on glossy letterhead from a company called Ridgeback Development Corp. "This came last week," he said. "It's an offer. They want to buy the land from you. $5,000. $5,000. To an 18-year-old with exactly $74 to her name, it sounded like a fortune. It was enough for a security deposit on a tiny apartment, first and last month's rent, and maybe a few weeks of groceries. It was a bridge to somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't here. But it was also a bridge that would crumble behind me the moment I crossed it. "They're buying up a lot of land in that area," Mr. Henderson continued, his tone carefully neutral. "They say they're planning some kind of resort. The offer is probably fair, for what it is. An empty acre and a pile of rotting wood. A pile of rotting wood. The word stung. It was the only thing anyone had ever left me, the only inheritance I would ever have, and it was a pile of rotting wood. I felt a familiar tightness in my throat. I wouldn't cry. I hadn't cried in years. Crying was a luxury the system didn't afford you. You don't have to decide now, he said gently. You have 90 days in the transitional housing program. That gives you some time. My advice? Take the bus up there. See it for yourself before you sign anything. Just so you know what you're giving away. Giving away. That was the story of my life. Giving away my parents to a car crash. Giving away my childhood to a series of strangers' houses. Giving away my name in exchange for a case number. Now I was supposed to give away the last piece of my history, the final, pathetic link to a family I barely remembered. I picked up the smaller envelope. It was heavier than it looked. I tore it open and dumped the contents onto the table. There wasn't much. A silver locket, tarnished with age, empty inside. A small, faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a sad smile, her hair pulled back from her face. My grandmother. And a key. It was heavy, made of black iron, with an ornate, almost floral design at the top. It was an old key. The kind that belonged to a pirate's chest or a castle dungeon, not a derelict barn. It felt cold and solid in my palm, a small, tangible piece of a life I'd never known. It felt like a question without an answer. The bus ride was a 5-hour blur of gray highway and anonymous green trees. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching the world slide by. The city gave way to suburbs, the suburbs to sprawling fields, and finally, the fields to dense, dark woods. Each mile felt like a journey further back in time, further away from anything I recognized. I clutched the small box with my grandmother's things, the iron key a heavy weight in my pocket. I had Mr. Henderson's $74, the developer's offer, and a deed to a pile of rotting wood. This was the sum total of my life's assets. The bus let me off at a gas station that also served as Havenwood's official bus depot. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road. A post office, a general store, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. The air smelled different here, cleaner, but with an undercurrent of damp earth and wood smoke. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a secret being kept. I asked the man behind the counter at the gas station for directions to my property. He was old, with a face like a crumpled map. He squinted at the address on the deed. "Thorn property," he grunted, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "That's been empty for years. It's a couple miles out of town. You're not thinking of staying out there, are you?" "Just looking," I said, not wanting to share my life story with a stranger. He gave me a vague set of directions that involved a left at a fallen oak tree and a right at a rusted-out pickup. I shouldered my backpack, the only luggage I owned, and started walking. The road quickly turned from cracked asphalt to gravel, and the houses disappeared, replaced by thick forest that crowded the edges of the path. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way, but it was also lonely. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the rustle of unseen things in the woods. After nearly an hour of walking, I saw it. Just past a bend in the road, set back in a clearing, was my inheritance. Mr. Henderson had been kind. Derelict was a generous word. The barn was a skeleton. Its roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse, and several of the wall planks were missing, leaving dark, gaping holes. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, as if a strong wind might finally convince it to lie down and die. The acre of land it sat on was a riot of weeds and thorny bushes, reclaiming what had once been cleared. A profound sense of despair washed over me, so potent it was almost nauseating. The developer's $5,000 wasn't a lowball offer. It was charity. I pushed my way through the overgrown weeds, my sneakers getting soaked with dew. The main doors of the barn were held shut by a thick, rusty chain and a modern padlock. Of course. The one thing that wasn't falling apart was a thing keeping me out. I walked around the perimeter, peering through the gaps in the walls. The inside was a cavern of shadows, filled with indistinct shapes and the thick, musty smell of decay. Around the back, one of the smaller side doors had rotted off its hinges and lay half buried in the dirt. I slipped through the opening. The air inside was thick and cold, heavy with the dust of years. Sunlight streamed through the holes in the roof in dusty, cathedral-like shafts, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The place was filled with junk. Not farm junk, but just junk. Piles of old furniture covered in white sheets, stacks of yellowed newspapers, boxes of mason jars, and rows upon rows of rusted tools hanging from the walls. It looked like someone had simply walked away from their life and left everything behind. I wandered through the aisles of forgotten things, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. This was her life. My grandmother's. A woman I couldn't remember had lived here, had touched these things. I ran my hand over a dusty workbench, tracing the deep scratches in the wood. What had she been like? Why had she left me? Why had she stayed away? The questions hung in the dusty air, as silent and heavy as everything else. Defeated, I sank onto an old wooden crate. I pulled the developer's letter from my pocket. $5,000. I could be on a bus back to the city by nightfall. I could sign the paper, take the money, and never think about this sad, forgotten place again. It was the smart thing to do, the logical thing. But as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I never knew, something held me back. It felt like surrender. It felt like letting the last piece of my history be bulldozed and paved over without a fight. My fingers found the iron key in my pocket. I pulled it out, its cold weight a familiar comfort. On a whim, I walked over to the main doors and examined the padlock. It was a standard master lock, its keyhole small and modern. My strange, ancient key was useless. I sighed, frustration building. The whole trip was a waste of time. I was about to turn and leave when my eyes caught something on the wall next to the door. Hanging there was a row of heavy-duty tools. Wrenches, hammers, crowbars. One of them, a massive pipe wrench, looked different from the others. While the rest were plain, functional steel, the handle of this one was made of the same black iron as my key, and it had the same ornate, floral pattern worked into the metal at its base. It was a perfect match. It couldn't be a coincidence. My heart started to beat a little faster. I took the wrench off its hook. It was incredibly heavy. I looked from the wrench to the key in my other hand, and then back to the wall where the wrench had been hanging. Behind the row of tools, the wooden planks of the barn wall were all weathered to a uniform silvery gray. Except for one section. Right behind where the big wrench had hung, there was a patch of newer-looking wood, the planks a slightly different color, the nails less rusted. It was a section about 3 feet square, and it had been deliberately hidden behind the heaviest, most awkward tools. My breath caught in my throat. I used the claw end of a hammer to pry at the edge of one of the boards. It resisted, then gave way with a groan of protesting wood. I pulled it off, and then another, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and excitement. Behind the planks was not more wall. It was a small, square, black metal door, set flush into the framing of the barn. And in the center of it was a keyhole. Not a modern one, but a large, old-fashioned one. My hand trembled as I lifted the iron key. It slid into the lock with a smooth, satisfying click. I turned it. There was a loud, heavy clunk from inside the wall, and the small metal door swung inward, revealing a dark, recessed cavity. It wasn't a hidden room. It was a safe. A wall safe. and inside, protected from the dust and the damp, sat a single, thick, leather-bound ledger and a stack of sealed envelopes tied together with a faded silk ribbon. I reached in and pulled them out. The ledger was heavy, its leather cover worn smooth with use. The envelopes were thick, and my name, Maya, was written on the top one in a looping, elegant script I'd never seen before. My grandmother's handwriting. I sank back down onto the crate, my legs suddenly weak. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the rotting barn. This. For a long time, I just sat there, the book and the letters in my lap, the dusty shafts of light moving slowly across the floor as the sun crawled across the sky. The weight of it all felt immense. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a responsibility. Part of me wanted to put it all back, lock the safe, nail the boards back on, and walk away. Take the $5,000 and run. Life had taught me that secrets were dangerous, that the past was a place that could hurt you. But another part of me, a part I thought had died long ago, was buzzing with a fierce, desperate curiosity. This was a piece of my own story, a story that had been denied to me my entire life. I untied the ribbon. The top envelope was thick. I carefully broke the wax seal, my fingers fumbling. Inside was a letter, many pages long, covered in that same elegant script. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, it means two things. First, that you have turned 18 and you are finally free. And second, that I am gone. I am so sorry, my sweet girl. I am sorry for every day I wasn't with you." The words blurred. I swiped at my eyes, angry at the tears. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry. I need you to believe me when I tell you that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was not abandonment, it was protection. I sent you away to keep you safe. This town, Havenwood, it looks peaceful. But there is a sickness in its heart, a poison in its veins, and I got too close to it. I couldn't let it touch you, too. The letter went on to explain. My grandmother, Eleanor, hadn't been just some old woman living in a barn. She had been an investigative journalist for a city paper decades ago, before she retired to the quiet life she thought she wanted in Havenwood. But she couldn't turn off her reporter's instincts. She started noticing things. People in the town getting sick with strange cancers. The creek water running cloudy after a hard rain. The way the Ridgeback family, who owned the old quarry and most of the town, seemed to be above the law. She started digging, quietly, carefully. What she discovered was horrifying. For over 30 years, the Ridgeback Development Corporation had been using the abandoned quarry as an illegal dumping ground for toxic industrial waste from their other businesses. They were poisoning the groundwater, the very lifeblood of the town, to save a few dollars. They bought up the land from sick families for pennies on the dollar, waiting for the evidence of their crimes to be buried deep enough. My grandmother had found the proof. Shipping manifests, falsified environmental reports, testimony from a disgruntled former employee. She had it all. She was about to go public when they found out. The letter didn't go into detail about what happened. It just said, "They made it clear to me that if I ever spoke a word of it, they would hurt the only person I had left in the world. You, Maya. They knew about you. So I made a choice. I gave you up to the state, making it look like I was just another failed old woman who couldn't cope. I disappeared, hoping they would believe I was scared into silence. But I never stopped fighting. This barn isn't a home. It's my evidence locker. Everything you need is here." My head was spinning. Abandonment. Protection. The two words chased each other around in my mind. My entire life, my entire identity, had been built on the story of being left behind. And now, that story was cracking, shattering, revealing something far more complex and heartbreaking underneath. I looked at the ledger. It wasn't an account book. It was her investigation journal. Dates, names, chemical formulas, coded notes. It was the roadmap of her entire investigation. The proof. Listen, if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. This was the moment my whole world turned upside down. One minute, I was an orphan with a worthless inheritance, and the next, I was holding a legacy of truth that had cost my grandmother everything. Have you ever discovered something that made you question everything you thought you knew about your family or your past? It's a lonely, terrifying feeling. Let me know in the comments if you've been there. This community is a place where we share those stories, because knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Now, let's get back to the barn. Just as I was trying to process the first letter, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Maya Thorne?" a man's voice asked. It was smooth, friendly, almost paternal. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice tight. "This is Robert Ridgeback, from Ridgeback Development. I was just calling to follow up on our offer for your grandmother's property. I know it's not much, but we're trying to clean up some of those old derelict lots, improve the community. You know how it is." Robert Ridgeback. The name from the letter. My blood ran cold. He was talking to me as if he were a friendly neighbor, not the man who had threatened my grandmother and poisoned his own town. The casual evil of it was breathtaking. "I'm looking at it right now," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Ah, good," he said, his tone brightening. "So you see what I mean, not much there. Tell you what, because I feel for your situation, a young person just starting out. I can go up to 7,000. That's my final offer. We can have the paperwork couriered to you today. You could have the money in your account by tomorrow." He was pushing. He was pushing hard. Before, the offer had seemed like a lifeline. Now it felt like a bribe. A cheap price to pay to bury his secrets forever. I looked down at my grandmother's handwriting, at the ledger filled with her careful, dangerous work. I saw the photo of her sad, kind eyes. For 10 years, I had believed she didn't want me. Now I knew she had given up everything for me. Selling this land wasn't just a financial transaction anymore. It was a betrayal. "No," I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The friendly tone vanished, replaced by a cold edge. "No? I'm not interested in selling," I said, and the words felt powerful, solid. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was the one holding the cards. "I think you're making a mistake, Miss Thorne," he said, his voice low and menacing. "That property isn't worth anything to you. It's just a liability. Take the money." "Goodbye, Mr. Ridgeback," I said, and I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline, from anger. I had a choice to make. I could take the other things my grandmother had left me, because I was sure there was more, and disappear. Or I could stay. I could fight. I could finish what she started. I looked at the ledger again. My grandmother's letter had said the barn was her evidence locker. It also said, "The ledger is the key to everything. The symbols will guide you." I flipped through the pages. It was mostly dense text, but every few pages she had drawn a small, simple symbol in the margin. One was a circle with a cross through it. Another was a simple wave. And another was the same floral design from my key and the wrench. The key to everything. It wasn't just a metaphor. I stood up, my sense of purpose renewed. I started with the floral symbol. The ledger entry next to it was about soil sample contamination levels, with a note that said, "Under the bench where new life begins." I went to the workbench. It was covered in old, empty seed packets and clay pots. New life. I cleared everything off the surface and ran my hands along the underside. Near the back, my fingers brushed against a small, recessed latch. I pulled it. A false bottom in one of the deep drawers popped open. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, was another stack of letters and a bundle of documents held together with a rusty paperclip. These were the originals. The shipping manifests, the falsified reports, the smoking gun. Next, I looked for the wave symbol. The note next to it said, "Where the water once flowed." At the back of the barn, there was an old, dry sink with a hand pump. The pump was seized with rust. I looked underneath it, behind the rotted-out cabinet doors. Tucked away in the dark, dusty space behind the pipes was a small metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. Inside was cash, stacks of it, old bills neatly bundled. It must have been tens of thousands of dollars. It was her escape fund. The money she had saved to start a new life with me, a life she never got to have. A note on top simply said, "For your future, Maya, whatever you choose." The final symbol was the circle with the cross, a symbol I now recognized from the town's welcome sign, Havenwood. The note beside it was cryptic. "The heart of the town is rotten. Dig under the floor where the weight is greatest." I scanned the barn. What had the greatest weight? In the very center of the barn, directly under the sagging main beam of the roof, was a massive, ancient-looking anvil sitting on a thick stump of wood. It must have weighed hundreds of pounds. It took all my strength, using a long crowbar as a lever, but I managed to shift it just enough to expose the floorboards underneath. One of the boards was loose. I pulled it up. Beneath it was a cavity, and in that cavity was one last metal box. This one was locked, with a simple, modern lock. There was no key, but taped to the lid was an envelope with Mr. Henderson's name on it. My heart sank. She had planned for this. She had planned for all of it. She knew she might not survive, and she had created this intricate, hidden trail of breadcrumbs for me, and only me, to follow. She had trusted me, and she had trusted Mr. Henderson. Inside the box was a tape recorder and a single microcassette. And another letter, this one addressed to me. "My dearest Maya," it began. "This is the last letter, I promise. And it is the hardest to write. If you have found this, you have found everything. You have the proof, you have the money to run, and you have a choice. The tape in this box is the most dangerous piece of all. It is a recording of my last meeting with Robert Ridgeback, the one where he threatened you. It is the only thing that directly ties him to the conspiracy. It is my confession, and it is his conviction." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "A confession?" "He offered me a deal," the letter continued. "My silence in exchange for your safety. But he wanted insurance. He forced me to record a statement, a false confession, saying that I was the one who had tried to blackmail him, that I had fabricated the evidence to extort money from his company. He said if I ever went to the authorities, he would release the tape, and I would be the one who went to prison. The real recording, the one of his threats, is underneath that one, on the same tape. You can't have one without the other. It was a trap, a brilliant diabolical trap. My grandmother had protected me, but she had also implicated herself. If I used the tape, I would be sending my own grandmother's name through the mud, painting her as a criminal to the world. He would be exposed, but she would be too. It was her final sacrifice. She was willing to give up her own reputation, her own legacy, to see justice done. The letter ended with one final paragraph. "You do not have to do this, my love. You do not owe me, or this town, anything. You can take the money and build a life for yourself, a good life, a safe life. That is all I ever wanted for you. But if you choose to fight, know that you are not just fighting for the people of Havenwood. You are fighting for the truth. And the truth, once it is set free, is a powerful thing. The choice is yours. You are no longer a child at the mercy of the world. You are a woman, strong and brave. You are a thorn. Whatever you decide, I will be proud of you." I sat on the dusty floor of the barn, the tape recorder feeling like a bomb in my hands. I cried then. I cried for the first time in 10 years. I cried for the little girl who thought she was unloved. I cried for the grandmother I never got to know, a woman of such incredible courage and love that she would orchestrate her own damnation to protect her grandchild and expose a great evil. I cried for the terrible, beautiful weight of the choice she had left me. For hours, I sat there, just thinking. I thought about the $74, about the group home, about the endless feeling of being powerless. I thought about Robert Ridgeback's condescending voice on the phone, the casual cruelty of a man who believed he was untouchable. I looked around the barn. It wasn't a pile of rotting wood anymore. It was a fortress. It was a testament. It was a legacy. And my grandmother was right. The choice was mine. I could take the money and run. No one would blame me. It was the sensible thing to do. But since when had my life been sensible? I picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. I called the one person my grandmother had trusted. I called Mr. Henderson. "Maya, is everything okay?" he answered, his voice thick with concern. "I need your help," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm in Havenwood, and I know why Ridgeback wants this land. My grandmother, she left everything here. You're not going to believe what I found." To his credit, Mr. Henderson didn't question me. He just listened. I told him everything. About the letters, the ledger, the documents, the money, the tape. I could hear his sharp intake of breath over the phone. When I was done, there was a long silence. "Maya," he finally said, and his voice was different, stripped of its usual weariness and filled with a kind of awe. "You stay put. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming. I'll be there before sunrise." He was true to his word. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the holes in the barn roof, his dusty sedan pulled up the gravel road. He got out, his suit rumpled from the all-night drive, and looked at the barn, then at me. "Let's see it," he said. We spent the entire day in the barn, going over everything. He read the letters, his face growing grim. He examined the documents, letting out a low whistle. We counted the money and sealed it in an evidence bag. Finally, I showed him the tape recorder. "This is the key," he said, holding it carefully. "Without this, it's just a pile of documents that Ridgeback could claim were forged. This is the human element. His voice, her voice. But it's her confession too," I said quietly. "It will ruin her name." Mr. Henderson looked at me, and his eyes were full of a fierce respect. "Your grandmother was a hero, Maya. Sometimes, heroes have to get their hands dirty. She knew what she was doing. She was giving you a choice, but she was also giving you the weapon you needed to win. She was willing to sacrifice her reputation to make sure the truth came out. The question is, are you willing to let her?" We didn't go to the local police. My grandmother's notes made it clear that Ridgeback had the sheriff in his pocket. Instead, Mr. Henderson made a call to a friend of his from law school, a woman who now worked for the state's Environmental Protection Agency. He then called another friend, a journalist at a major state newspaper. He was building a team. He was building a firewall around me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Investigators from the EPA descended on Havenwood, taking soil and water samples. The journalist Mr. Henderson called, a woman named Sarah with sharp eyes and a sharper pen, met with me in secret. I gave her copies of everything. I told her my story. I told her my grandmother's story. The day her article broke, it was like a dam bursting. It was front-page news. "The Havenwood Poison," the headline screamed. Ridgeback Development's public relations machine went into overdrive. They denied everything. They called my grandmother a disgruntled extortionist. They released her faked confession to the media. For a few days, it worked. Public opinion was split. People didn't know who to believe. Robert Ridgeback went on television, looking calm and authoritative, calling it all a tragic misunderstanding, a smear campaign orchestrated by a troubled young woman. But they hadn't counted on the tape. The EPA forensics lab was able to isolate the two recordings. On the day of Ridgeback's preliminary hearing, the prosecutor played the second recording for the court, the one that was hidden underneath. The courtroom was silent as they heard Ridgeback's voice, cold and clear, threatening to harm a little girl. Threatening me. That was the end of it. The truth, as my grandmother had written, was a powerful thing once it was set free. The legal battle was long and messy, but with the evidence my grandmother had collected, the outcome was never really in doubt. Ridgeback and several of his executives went to prison. The company was forced into bankruptcy, its assets seized to fund the single largest environmental cleanup in the state's history. The people of Havenwood, the families who had been sick for so long without knowing why, finally had answers. They had justice. In the end, I didn't take the money and run. I stayed. I used a portion of the cash my grandmother had left me, my college fund, she had called it, to hire a local contractor to restore the barn. Not as a barn, but as a home. We jacked up the foundation, put on a new roof, and replaced the missing planks. We installed windows and plumbing and electricity. Slowly, painstakingly, the dark, derelict structure was transformed into a place of light and warmth. My home. I kept the workbench right where it was. I hung my grandmother's photograph above it. I kept the iron key, not in a box, but on a hook by the door, a reminder of the secrets the barn had held. The town of Havenwood began to heal, too. With the Ridgeback dynasty gone, people started to talk. Stories that had been whispered for years were finally spoken aloud. I learned more about my grandmother from the townspeople than I ever did from her letters. They told me about her quiet kindness, her fierce intelligence, and her stubborn refusal to look away from injustice. They had been afraid to help her then, but they weren't afraid to help me now. They brought me casseroles and offered to help plant a garden. They made me feel like I belonged. My inheritance wasn't 1 acre of land and a pile of rotting wood. It wasn't even the money or the evidence she left behind. My real inheritance was the choice she gave me. The choice to be more than a victim of my circumstances. The choice to stand for something. She had spent her life fighting for the truth, and in the end, she had passed that fight on to me. She taught me that home isn't just a place you live, it's a place you fight for. And family isn't just about blood, it's about the legacy of love and courage you carry with you. That first winter in my new home, I sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the quiet fields of Havenwood. The world outside was clean and white and new. For the first time in my life, I felt safe, I felt free. I felt like I was finally, truly, home. My grandmother taught me that what you're given in life is just the starting point. The land, the barn, the rusty key, they were just objects. They became my inheritance only when I chose what to do with them. When I chose to see not a ruin, but a foundation. When I chose to unlock not just a safe, but a story. If this story has meant something to you, if it's reminded you that even the smallest, most broken things can hold incredible power, then please subscribe and become a part of this community we're building. Share your own story in the comments. Tell me about a time you found strength in a place you least expected it, or a person who left you a legacy that had nothing to do with money. Because every single one of our stories matters. They are the keys that unlock the truth. Thank you for listening.